Here's what the investigators saw. From the street, the house looked ordinary, untouched. The garage door was shut. The neighborhood lay quiet under the harsh Arizona morning sun. Inside, her phone sat on a counter, her purse untouched, her daily medication in place. The clothes she wore to dinner the night before were neatly folded or hung. She had changed into pajamas before her evening ended in ways no one expected. But the back doors were open. Blood on the front porch confirmed it was hers. Nancy Guthrie, 84, with limited mobility and a lifetime of daily medication, was gone. And when you run the night backward, most accounts focus only on 9:48 p.m. on January 31st. The garage door, the drop-off, the assumption. Yet the confirmed investigative record shows this story begins much earlier. What mainstream coverage has systematically overlooked, that very morning, hours before Nancy left for dinner, a suspicious vehicle was reported in the neighborhood. Investigators immediately flagged this sighting, integrating it into the surveillance pattern they were reconstructing around the property. Every detail mattered. Every movement traced the steps leading to her disappearance. Nancy was still inside her home that morning, hours before she would call the Uber to Annie's at 5:32 p.m. The vehicle spotted in the neighborhood that day wasn't following her. It was waiting, anticipating her movements. Whoever occupied that car was not reacting. They were already ahead, embedded in the flow of her life. They watched the house in daylight, tracking the routines that would later guide the operation. Who came and went, when the streets fell quiet, who might be observing. This was deliberate pre-operational reconnaissance, a methodical check to ensure the plan remained on track. Investigators noted the same pattern earlier in January, on the 11th and again on the 24th. These sightings were not random. In response, the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a precise request to neighbors: turn over any surveillance footage from January 11th, beginning at 9 p.m. Every frame mattered. Every timing confirmed the careful preparation behind Nancy's disappearance. The requested footage wasn't vague or general. Law enforcement specifically asked for recordings from January 11th at 9 p.m. to midnight, January 24th at the same hours, and January 31st between 9:30 a.m. and 11 a.m. These are precise, narrow windows. Investigators weren't casting a wide net. They already had reason to know something significant happened during these moments. 3 dates. 3 time frames. Each chosen deliberately. This level of precision reveals that by the time the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued the requests, they already had a working theory: pre-event surveillance. They had enough information to pinpoint specific dates and hours. Which begs the question: what did they see, or who told them, to produce requests that exact? The requests themselves are part of the public record, but the underlying evidence remains undisclosed. Targeted requests like this don't arise from general suspicion. They come from knowledge already in hand. What this tells us is critical. Nancy Guthrie was being watched for weeks before anyone acted. January 31st wasn't the first night near her home. It was the final move in a careful sequence of observation stretching back at least 20 days. By 5:32 p.m., she left in an Uber for Annie's house. 64 days later, law enforcement secured the dashcam footage from that ride. Every frame is now being analyzed, cross-referenced against the neighborhood surveillance collected weeks earlier. This footage is not just a record of her last known movements. It's a dynamic map of her route, her surroundings, and potentially of any vehicle shadowing her that evening. The 64-day delay in accessing the Uber dashcam isn't just a footnote. It's a crucial data point. It wasn't deliberately withheld. Investigators had to confirm the driver, verify the footage existed, and submit a formal request. But that means for the first 7 weeks of this case, the period from 5:32 p.m. to 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, her ride, arrival at Annie's, the dinner, the drop-off, remained largely unexamined on video. That window is exactly when anyone monitoring Nancy Guthrie's movements would have been most active, yet investigators had only partial visual insight until the footage arrived. The crime that left her home empty on February 1st didn't start at 9:48 p.m. The confirmed record points to planning that began weeks earlier. The same person, or people, who observed her house on January 11th and January 24th were back near the neighborhood on the morning she disappeared. They weren't random passers-by. They had a clear understanding of what they were building toward. Sheriff Chris Nanos outlined the official timeline on February 5, 2026, with the authority of law enforcement. But buried in that presentation was a single word with enormous weight: assume. Referring to the garage door closing at 9:50 p.m., Nanos said, "It's at that time we assume Nancy is home and probably going to bed." Not confirmed. Not evidenced. Just assumed. Since then, most retellings have quietly replaced that assumption with a declarative statement: Nancy was home. It isn't a conspiracy, it's human nature. We fill gaps in knowledge with the most logical narrative, then treat those gaps as fact. In a case this complex, every assumption masquerading as confirmation is a potential blind spot, and that single word, assume, anchors the very beginning of the abduction timeline. Let's break the timeline down with precision, separating what's confirmed from what's assumed, because the Atotwire 405 analysis, viewed nearly 6,000 times since March 31st, isn't just about where Nancy Guthrie was physically. It's about how assumptions have quietly replaced confirmed data in public narratives. Here's what's confirmed. The garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed at 9:50 p.m., verified by camera data. What's assumed? That Nancy entered the house and stayed inside. The door's movement is confirmed. Her continuous presence is not. The next confirmed point: the masked figure appearing on the doorbell camera after midnight. Between 9:50 p.m. and that appearance, roughly 2 hours and 5 minutes, there is no confirmed electronic record, no verified sighting, no external data placing Nancy in her home. This gap has been treated as passive, empty, Nancy asleep. But Nancy asleep is an assumption, not a confirmed fact. At 1 hour 64 minutes a.m., the doorbell camera disconnected. Confirmed. Assumed. That the masked intruder caused it, and that Nancy was inside when it happened. The data itself is only a disconnection event. The narrative of abductor and victim is applied on top of it. The secondary camera detected motion at 2:12 a.m., confirmed by PCSD. What's assumed? That the motion was human, that it was the masked suspect. Nanos cautioned the software couldn't rule out an animal. The confirmed data: a motion alert of undetermined origin. Its role in the timeline is unexplained publicly. The pacemaker app disconnected at 2:28 a.m., confirmed. Assumed. That Nancy was separated from her phone at that moment, inside the home. The pacemaker signal is a Bluetooth proximity event. It only shows two devices stopped communicating. It does not confirm location or who was present when the signal dropped. Every step shows a critical pattern. Confirmed events exist, but narratives of abduction, presence, and intent are layered assumptions. Understanding that distinction reframes the timeline, revealing gaps that have been quietly filled with inference rather than evidence. Here's what's certain: Nancy Guthrie's phone, purse, medication, and even her pajamas remained inside the home. These are concrete anchors, proof she returned, changed, and settled in for the night. Sheriff Nanos has said he believes she was taken from her bed. But even with these physical confirmations, the timeline leaves critical gaps. When did the primary encounter actually happen? Was someone already inside during the 2-hour window between the garage door closing at 9:50 p.m. and the masked figure's appearance after midnight? Were the pajamas just evidence she had returned, or did they coexist with a presence she didn't expect? The back doors are a key piece of this puzzle. If they had been propped open before Nancy arrived, someone may have accessed the house hours earlier. She could have walked into a home already entered, a scenario that leaves the scene physically unchanged, the pajamas, the belongings, but fundamentally alters the sequence of events. These are exactly the questions the Atotwire 405 framework is designed to explore. It's not about whether Nancy was inside, she was. It's about what was happening inside during those critical 2 hours. Was the masked figure at the front door the start of the crime, or merely the visible tip of a longer operation already underway? Every careful analysis of this case points back to the same uncertainty. The surface tells one story, but beneath it, the timeline may have been running on an entirely different track. Here's what the footage confirms. He was deliberate, prepared, and intimately familiar with the property. That's not speculation, it's a consensus drawn directly from observation. Yet the behavioral implications, when layered over the timeline, reveal something most reporting has yet to fully explore. He is not just present, he is confirmed. The suspect, male, 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, average build, face masked, rubber gloves, carrying a 25-liter Ozark trail hiking pack. Armed with a handgun tucked into an improvised waist holster. The FBI has formally identified him as a suspect in the kidnapping, not merely a person of interest. He arrives after midnight, walks straight to the Nest doorbell camera, and begins executing a plan. First, he attempts to remove the camera physically. When that fails, he reaches into a potted plant and covers the lens with foliage, a pre-planned contingency. This is not improvisation, it's preparation executed flawlessly under pressure. The potted plant and its position were identified beforehand, either through a prior visit or precise surveillance. Consider the level of planning this requires, arriving at a property after midnight, armed with a primary and backup plan, and executing the secondary without hesitation. It demands prior knowledge of camera placement, proximity of obstacles, and the discipline to act exactly as rehearsed. This is not the behavior of someone encountering a stranger's door for the first time. This is someone who has already walked through the scenario in their mind, perhaps multiple times, before even setting foot on the property. Here's what we know about the critical early morning window. The Nest camera disconnected at 1 hour 64 minutes a.m., roughly 2 hours after the masked suspect first appeared at the front door. What happened during that stretch? Footage shows him at the door, but standing outside in the middle of the night for 2 hours in a quiet neighborhood is not a casual pause. Was he waiting for a signal? Monitoring the exterior while something occurred inside? Or was the camera's disconnection triggered remotely, independent of his physical actions? Sheriff Nanos confirmed the camera was not smashed or destroyed. It wasn't a violent removal, it was a disconnection. That distinction shifts the interpretation entirely. A destroyed camera tells a story of brute force. A networked disconnection implies technical knowledge, planning, and possibly another actor inside the home. It could have been disconnected from within the house, someone with access to the router, or even disrupted externally via the network. Each scenario carries unique implications for who was inside and when. Former FBI Special Agent Raymond Carr told News Nation he believes the back doors were not exits but entry points. His perspective aligns with former SWAT Commander Bob Kager, who also concludes the front porch was the exit, supported by blood evidence and the impassable terrain behind the property. This suggests additional individuals may have been directed into the home through the back while the front remained the designated exit, further complicating the timeline and sequence of the operation. Here's the operational picture that emerges from expert analysis. The back doors served as the entry point, the front door as the exit, and the operation involved more than one person executing simultaneous roles. The masked man appears on the front camera, visible and deliberate, but that visibility masks the full scale of the operation. Whoever came through the back remains unseen, there is no recovered footage, and the front security gate is too secure to have been breached alone. If anyone had tried to enter through the front, they would have needed inside facilitation. If entry was through the back, the doors were already open, prepared in advance. Retired Pima County Homicide Detective Kurt Dabb estimates 2 to 4 people were involved, reasoning that moving an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility, managing surveillance, and navigating the property at night exceeds the capacity of a single individual. Former FBI agent Raymond Carr concurs. One person alone could not have executed the logistics of this operation. The evidence points to a coordinated effort. Multiple actors, pre-staged access points, a masked figure controlling the front while others manage the interior. This is not an ad hoc crime. It is a carefully designed operational architecture that could not have been assembled spontaneously on the night of January 31st. The planning behind this operation is evident in the ransom notes themselves. At least one note contained intimate, verifiable details about Nancy Guthrie's home and even what she was wearing the night she vanished. A CBS affiliate in Tucson received such a note, and TMZ received another. One included a clear deadline, February 9th at 5 p.m., and demanded $6 million in Bitcoin. complete with a cryptocurrency address. While someone was later arrested for a fabricated note, that arrest does nothing to settle the note containing the insider specifics. Its authenticity remains publicly unresolved. Consider the level of operational precision required. Composing a note with these details, transmitting it to media outlets within 24 hours, and coordinating it alongside an active situation. This is not impulsive crime behavior. The framework, the infrastructure, had to be ready in advance. A Bitcoin wallet prepared, payment amounts calculated against the family's capacity, a deadline set based on realistic mobilization time, and multiple media outlets lined up to maximize pressure. The note specifics, the clothing, the home, were added either immediately before or during the event, but the system that enabled its execution had been constructed long before the night began. This is meticulous planning, not improvisation. Nothing about this ransom note was improvised in the aftermath of an abduction. A note specifying a Bitcoin address and a payment deadline does not happen on a whim. The amount was calculated, the cryptocurrency setup established, and the decision to target the Guthrie family, because of Savannah's public platform, was made in advance, based on deliberate research into the family's financial capacity. Cameron Guthrie confirmed this privately when Savannah asked, "Did this happen because of me?" And he answered, "It probably did." That kind of targeting, mapping the family, assessing their ability to pay, cannot be done the night before. It takes weeks. The surveillance observed on January 11th, January 24th, and the morning of January 31st is the tangible record of that research phase. The ransom note itself is the proof of where that research was heading. The insider specifics, the clothing, the home, demonstrate access to information that could only come from direct observation, prior entry, or someone close to the victim. On March 31st, a social media account called Hotwire405 posted a theory that quickly reached nearly 6,000 views before mainstream coverage had fully responded. Its headline claim, that Nancy never returned home that night, conflicts immediately with confirmed evidence. Her belongings were inside, she had changed into pajamas, and Sheriff Nanos confirmed she was taken from her bed. The logistical version of the theory cannot reconcile those anchors. But the theory's more precise form does not hinge on whether Nancy entered her garage at 9:50 p.m., and that version remains unaddressed. That is the question this video is actually asking. What if the Nancy Guthrie who left her house for dinner at 5:32 p.m. on January 31st never truly returned? Not that her body didn't come back. The evidence proves it did. Her belongings, her pajamas, her routine were all in place. She moved through those rooms. She was physically present. But the version of Nancy who existed before that evening, the woman alive in her own life, untouched by a crime, that Nancy never came back. Everything after the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. was not a pause before the crime. It was the crime unfolding around her. This is the temporal lens that most coverage of the Hotwire 405 theory has missed. Reporters and commentators have focused on logistics. Did she enter the garage? Were her belongings inside? What does Sheriff Nanos believe? These answers are correct, but they are incomplete. They address the wrong question. The real question is temporal. For how long had Nancy Guthrie been unknowingly inside a crime? How long had the operation been assembled around her life, her schedule, her home, her family's public profile before the night of January 31st gave it a trigger to execute? The confirmed record lays it out. January 11th, 3 weeks prior, surveillance near her property at night. January 24th, more observation. The morning of January 31st, a vehicle parked near her house hours before she left. The Uber ride tracked. The drop-off anticipated. The back doors staged. The ransom note pre-written. By the time her garage door closed at 9:50 p.m., the perpetrators were not en route. They had been circling her world for 20 days. Surveillance began on January 11th. They returned on January 24th. And on the morning of the 31st, they were already near her neighborhood while she remained inside her home, unaware of the operation unfolding around her. They tracked, or anticipated, Nancy Guthrie's Uber at 5:32 p.m. They knew she would be at Annie's house. They knew roughly when she would return. And when that garage door closed at 9:50 p.m., the weeks-long operation entered its final phase. Was Nancy ever truly safe inside that house after 9:50? Or had the crime, in every practical sense, already been decided, prepared, and set in motion? That garage door didn't just close on her pajamas or her belongings. It closed on a scenario that had been building for 3 weeks. The question isn't about her appearance when the masked man arrived. It's about what happened in the 2 hours before him. Was that time passive, ordinary, safe? Or was it the first active stage of a meticulously staged operation? The back door propped open. The security gate the masked man couldn't breach alone. The foliage contingency already planned. The ransom note pre-written, ready to send. Weeks of surveillance, starting January 11th, continuing January 24th, and through the morning of January 31st, establish a pattern. These facts do not fit a crime that began at the doorbell camera. They point to a crime that was already in motion, a crime Nancy walked into, not one that arrived to find her. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this investigation isn't what investigators say publicly, it's where they look. The geography of a search reflects the investigator's working theory. You place resources where you believe the trail leads. FBI Director Kash Patel traveled to Tucson personally, a signal that the theory, the geography, and the evidence are tightly aligned. Every move, every observation, and every prior surveillance window builds toward the same conclusion. The operation did not start at midnight. It started weeks before, quietly, deliberately, and around Nancy Guthrie's life. This is not standard procedure. FBI directors rarely leave Washington to visit a single investigation site. That Kash Patel made the trip to Tucson signals the weight and sensitivity of what investigators were uncovering in the early weeks. It's a rare level of direct oversight, a silent message that this case demanded attention at the highest operational level. Some operations later shifted to Phoenix, a major hub north of Tucson with international transport links. That relocation is more than logistics, it is a geographic clue. Investigators were tracking something moving north, and the movement suggested possible cross-border activity. Law enforcement on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border was briefed on suspect footage, reflecting a standard protocol when a trail may extend into another country. Tucson sits roughly 60 miles from the Mexican border, and the official operational scope encompasses that entire corridor. A helicopter-mounted signal sniffer, tuned specifically to Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker model, was deployed. Devices like this are not used casually. They are activated only when investigators have a geographic hypothesis that the subject may be alive, within detectable range, and locatable from the air. That search was already extending beyond the neighborhood, targeting a radius defined by signal reach rather than the home itself. Even more striking, a Mexican volunteer search group, Madres Buscadoras Desaparecidas, traveled to Arizona with the explicit intent of assisting, bringing decades of experience locating missing persons. They were denied access by Pima County law enforcement, but their attempt underscores the border region dimension of the investigation, a detail largely overlooked in most media coverage. Every operational choice, the director's visit, the Phoenix relocation, the signal sniffer, the cross-border coordination, points to a scope far beyond a single house, reflecting the meticulous reach of investigators following a trail that already extends north and south of Tucson. These were not local volunteers from Tucson or nearby towns. They came from across the border, trained for cases that unfold in this geographic corridor. Their involvement underscores the international dimension of the investigation. At the same time, genetic genealogy was confirmed as part of the FBI's approach, building a family tree from DNA evidence to identify a suspect through distant relatives when a Cody's match fails, as it did with the glove evidence. This is slower than a direct match, but it has solved decades-old cold cases. It signals a commitment. The DNA points somewhere, and investigators will follow it wherever it leads, however long it takes. The ransom notes add another layer. A Bitcoin address, a $6 million demand, a specific deadline, and simultaneous delivery to multiple media outlets reveal an actor with digital financial literacy and the capability to operate across borders. Bitcoin transactions ignore borders. A wallet in Tucson and a payment received elsewhere are functionally identical. The crime, though beginning in a Tucson neighborhood, was never confined there. The geographic footprint, Phoenix operations, border briefings, helicopter signal searches, and a Mexican volunteer group crossing an international line demonstrates this. Every element, the director's personal visit, the shift to Phoenix, the border briefings, the aerial signal searches, the genealogical analysis, and cross-border volunteer involvement, is a response to a crime that was meticulously planned, involved multiple actors, and had a mobile geographic profile. This is not how law enforcement responds to a single opportunist who acted on a passing moment. This is the response reserved for perpetrators with resources, preparation, and infrastructure sufficient to operate across a wide geographic range before, during, and after the crime. And it circles back to the timeline question at the center of this video. A crime with that profile does not begin at 9:50 p.m. It does not begin when the masked man appears on the doorbell camera. It begins when the research phase begins. When someone first identified Nancy Guthrie as a target, first assessed the property, first made the decision that this family because of this daughter represented a viable operation. The surveillance on January 11th is the earliest confirmed marker of that phase in the public record, but the research likely preceded even that. There are specific questions the confirmed record raises and that no press conference has answered. The Uber dash cam footage obtained 64 days after the disappearance currently being analyzed frame by frame. What does it show along the route from Annie's home to NY's? Or any vehicles following, paralleling, or staging along the route on the evening of January 31st? The footage may extend the confirmed surveillance timeline backward from 9:50 p.m. to 5:32 p.m. or earlier. The analysis is ongoing. The results have not been shared publicly. The January 31st morning vehicle confirmed in the neighborhood before Nancy even left for dinner. Has that vehicle been identified? Does it connect to the masked man, to the January 11th or January 24th surveillance activity, or to anyone in the network investigators are building? This specific pre-event sighting predates the evening's events by hours and has received almost no public attention, despite being confirmed by investigators as part of the surveillance reconstruction. The backdoor timing, when exactly were the back doors propped open? This single question resolves the debate between Carr's entry theory and Krieger's exit theory. If the doors were propped before 9:50 p.m. before Nancy returned, then someone had already been inside the property or accessed it before the garage door closed. If the back doors were propped after Nancy was already inside, the questions multiply. From which side, by whom, and at what exact moment? Investigators have that information, but it has not been shared publicly. Then there is the 2:12 a.m. camera alert. What camera recorded it? What zone of the property does it cover? And has the motion been definitively attributed to a person or an animal? Was it the masked suspect, a second actor, or Nancy herself being moved? That alert occurs 25 minutes after the doorbell went dark and 16 minutes before the pacemaker stopped transmitting, right in the heart of the event window. Whatever triggered it is part of the crime, yet no public explanation has been offered. Inside, the home was processed as a crime scene. Mixed DNA samples were collected and sent to a private lab in Florida. Sheriff Nanos confirmed there was a processing snag, but the lab has been working through the samples. Once those results are returned and verified, they may reveal more about the interior encounter than anything the visible scene could show. Right now, these pending results are the single most critical unreleased piece of evidence in the investigation. Adding another layer, multiple media sources, including Fox News, ABC, and CNN, confirmed that at least one doorbell image may have been captured before February 1st. Sheriff Nanos, however, stated that PCSD has no evidence to officially confirm this. These two positions are not necessarily contradictory. Sources can possess information that law enforcement has not yet been able to verify publicly. Every unanswered question, every unreleased data point, continues to define the opaque center of this case. The technical question is clear, precise, and answerable. What does the metadata embedded in the recovered doorbell images reveal about their capture date? That metadata either exists or it doesn't, and either outcome adds a piece to the puzzle. Every one of these questions connects to the broader operation. Once they are answered, through arrest, court filings, or official investigative disclosure, that previously shadowed 2-hour window will become the most scrutinized segment of the timeline. Return to the scene where we began, a house that, from the outside, seemed untouched. Inside, Nancy's phone, purse, and medication sat in place. The clothes she had worn to dinner were folded. Her pajamas confirmed she had returned home and changed, settling into what seemed like a normal night. Outside, blood marked the porch, the back doors stood open, and the garage door had closed at 9:50 p.m., sealing the assumption that whatever came next was still in the future. 2 months later, we now know that assumption was wrong, but not in the way the headline version of the @Hotwire 405 theory suggested. Nancy was indeed home, but the crime was already in motion. 3 weeks of surveillance had mapped her schedule, rehearsed the operation, and coordinated every element of that night. The 2-hour gap between the garage door closing and the masked man's appearance was not empty. It was the active operational window of a crime entering its execution phase. The back doors had been staged, the ransom note written, the perpetrators positioned or nearby, and Nancy, who had simply returned from dinner and changed into pajamas, was already inside a plan meticulously constructed around her. Nancy was taken from her bed, that is the sheriff's belief. But the truth behind that simple statement is far more complex. She was taken by a crime that had already chosen her as a target long before she sat down to dinner on January 31st. The operation had set up the cryptocurrency wallet, calculated the ransom deadline, and staged the back doors before she even left her home. The bed was not the starting point. It was simply where the crime found her after weeks of planning. The @Hotwire 405 theory asked, what if Nancy never came home that night? The answer the evidence provides is different. She did return home. She did walk through her doors, change into pajamas, settle in, but she did not return to safety. The house was already enveloped in the crime. Every room, every detail, part of a plan set in motion as early as January 11th, when the first surveillance vehicles drove past her property and her life was quietly marked as the target. When the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m., the window for an alternate outcome had already shut. Not at midnight, not when the masked man appeared, but weeks earlier. The timeline shifts entirely when you read the confirmed record without layering assumptions. It is no longer about logistics, which door she entered, what she wore, or the events of that night. It is about the calculated orchestration that circled her life long before she knew to even look. Every episode in this series has built from confirmed sources and acknowledged uncertainty, and this one continues that methodical approach, revealing the crime's design behind the surface of a quiet Arizona evening. The @Hotwire 405 theory posed a question that demands careful attention. When weighed against the confirmed record, the belongings left inside, the pajamas, Sheriff Nanos's stated belief, the multi-actor operational analysis, the ransom note's pre-structured infrastructure, and the geographic breadth of the investigation, the theory's most defensible version is not refuted. It is instead clarified, deepened, and anchored in the documented pre-event activity that stretches back 3 weeks before January 31st. Critical pieces of evidence remain under close analysis and have yet to be publicly resolved. What does the Uber dashcam reveal along the route from Annie's house that evening? Has the morning vehicle seen on January 31st been identified and linked to the surveillance network? Precisely when and from which side were the back doors propped, before Nancy returned or after? What triggered the 2:12 a.m. secondary camera alert? And can it be definitively attributed to a person, an animal, or some other cause? The interior forensic results from the Florida lab, once the processing snag is resolved, may finally illuminate what occurred inside the home. The doorbell metadata may resolve whether a prior visit actually occurred. Each of these answers exists somewhere inside the investigation. They will eventually surface, through a press conference, court filings, or an arrest. And when they do, the full operational timeline of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance will begin to align with the confirmed evidence, filling in the gaps that have fueled speculation for months. This channel will continue to follow every development. Each episode in this series is available in the playlist, and the next video is already linked. Nancy Guthrie has now been missing for over 2 months. Her family is still waiting, the investigation remains active, and federal resources continue to work the case. The confirmed evidence paints a picture of a crime that was neither impulsive nor random. It was researched, calculated, and executed by individuals who planned the operation weeks in advance, weighing risks and preparing every step. To understand what happened, you cannot start at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, nor at midnight when the masked man appeared. The operation's true beginning traces back at least 3 weeks, to January 11th, when surveillance first placed someone observing Nancy's home. The critical 2-hour window between the garage door closing and the masked figure's appearance does not hold the start of the story. The origins of the crime are embedded in the pre-event activity, in the research, the reconnaissance, the infrastructure quietly set in motion long before that night. From the very first press conference, the confirmed record has been pointing to this starting point, hiding in plain sight inside a single word a sheriff once used and that almost nobody noticed. The timeline, properly interpreted, reveals that what the public sees as the night of January 31st is actually the culmination of weeks of preparation, not the beginning of the crime.